It's 12:37. Every Monday, we talk to someone outside of politics about what they'd do if they were in charge. And on Tuesday, we hear from politicians about how they keep themselves busy, away from political life. And today, we're joined by SNP MP and Shadow Leader in the Commons, Pete Wishart, one of the few MPs to have a discography section on their Wikipedia page. Is that right?
Well, I've not quite got a disco page, so I quite fancy doing a little bit of disco now and again. But yes, of course, I had a fantastic experience of spending 15 years in the music industry as a keyboard player with Runrig. And, I'm not entirely sure how that prepares and equips you for a life in Parliament. I certainly know something that I'll never, ever get an encore in the House of Commons.
Well, let's hear a slice. This is Runrig's hit, Loch Lomond.
The sun shines on Loch Lomond.
Pete Wishart, I think I said that wrong. Loch Lomond, is that what I should have said?
It's Loch Lomond.
Loch Lomond. Oh, it's just written down badly here. So, how did you get into this?
Into music? Well, yeah. I've always been fascinated with music. My father was an exceptional and fantastic accordion player, and he played the working men's clubs right across Fife where I was brought up, and he just made sure that we were always fully equipped with all sorts of musical instruments. I was sent to piano lessons by the time I was 4-year-old, and I was out gigging by the time I was 14, 15. This was around the punk period in the late 1970s, and I just became drawn into it and fascinated. Not just fascinated by listening to it, but how it was put together. What informed it, all the process and designing and putting on shows. It was just something that I really wanted to do, and it was from a very young age I committed myself to trying to ensure that I could play reasonably competently, and that we would do everything to try and get some success. And it's funny, for so many, I suppose, young men from my type of background, music was always the great gateway to better things for yourself and a means of self-improvement. And, it was just such an important route for us all, particularly if you could play a little bit like I was able to.
And who did you have in your mind's eye when you thought, I want to get on in music and be like that person?
Well, from my generation, it was always the people like David Bowie, Mark Bolan, even go back to the Rolling Stones. I mean, when growing up in the 1970s, music was absolutely huge. The stars dominated, and you just always wanted to be like them. You admired them. You listened to every word they said. You bought every single bit of the music press to try and ensure you understood what informed them. And it was just something that I think, it was just such a huge feature of our generation. And you just wanted to have a bit of that.
And so, tell me about Runrig and how that came about and how you were involved.
Well, I was really lucky. I was brought up in a place called Dunfermline in West Fife, and there was a band that dominated there in the late 1970s, a band called the Skids, who had, people probably remembered them with the single Into the Valley. The guy that played guitar in that was Stuart Adamson, who left the band and became a very good friend of mine and put together the band Big Country. So I was in Big Country in its early years, and it helped sort of put together some of the material that appeared on the album The Crossing. It didn't actually work out. We went on a disastrous tour with Alice Cooper, with audiences that couldn't stand us. And eventually we were thrown off this tour, and it led to all sorts of acrimony and dispute.
What kind of acrimony?
Well, the thing is, we were all. This was early days of New Romantics and things, and we were looking like Duran Duran, and we were playing in front of all these hairy, heavy metal fans who just took one look at us and thought, "What on earth is this?" And some of them actually turned their backs on us when we were performing, and things were starting to get put towards the stage. So I think it was under mutual agreement, it was decided that it would probably be best that we didn't do any more of these shows. But what that did was just stirred up a bit of tensions that were in the band. I left at that point. And Runrig were a huge fan of Big Country. They really admired what they'd done and the sort of music they were doing. So I was headhunted and recruited, and I spent 15 years with Runrig, and I loved every minute of it. The whole experience of making records, touring, doing something that you enjoy and always wanted to do was just so fantastic, and I really, really enjoyed my 15 years.
And you're on Top of the Pops, is that right?
We were Top of the Pops 5 times, and
that
was always fantastic. We had We had about 7 or 8 top 40 hits. None of them were huge hits. We weren't the type of band that sort of appealed to the Radio 1, like new audiences, but we had a very firm and dedicated and committed following who, like did buy most of the things that we put out. But it was always funny turning up to Top of the Pops and there'd be Oasis in the next dressing room, or Diana Ross acting like a diva, or, Blur being there, and all these people that you saw from week to week, and you were actually there because it's always a close space on Top of the Pops. And all the dressing rooms, they're actually no dividing at the very top of it, so you could hear everything that's going on. It was brilliant. It was so fascinating.
And did you get to work with anyone else that you admired? Not necessarily Diana Ross, but I mean, did you get to sort of collaborate with people that you'd admired for a while?
Well, not really so much, but when you were on tour, there was always opportunities just to sort of busk and play along with other musicians, and like we did quite a lot of some of the bigger the folk festivals, and you would be sitting next to Donovan and to Eric Bogle and all these great people that you sort of remembered, and it was just sessions in the end of the evening, particularly when we had sort of interest in some of the folk music, the Gaelic, like some of the more traditional elements, and it was always great just getting part of all that. I mean, we supported some really big bands. I mean, we actually played with U2 in 1987 at the back of the Joshua Tree tour, and we played with the Rolling Stones in Germany and Lou Reed in Denmark. And you always expected and hankered and hoped that somehow they would come and join in with you and play some of the music. The only person that actually joined us on stage was Chris de Burgh when we had supported him in the late 1980s, and he tried to come in and sing that song Loch Lomond. And for some reason, he seemed to go down 2 keys as we were playing it. Let's just say it didn't end up all that well.
And you weren't the only person in the band who was politically minded, but I wonder when you started to think, maybe I want to have a bit of a switch. Is it something that you talked about?
Yeah, I mean, like we always had a political agenda with Runrig. There was a lot of issues that were very close to our heart. We were always involved, particularly around the coming of the Scottish Parliament. It was something we were all totally committed to, and something we did a number of concerts and events to try and promote. So there was always that part. And you're right, the singer at that point, a guy called a friend of mine, Donny Munro, stood for the Labour Party in the 1990s, in the 1997 general election, and just lost out of being elected. I think we always say it with Runrig, for most rock and roll bands, it's when you're at the back of the tour bus, the discussion's all about sex, drugs and rock and roll. And with Runrig, unfortunately, it was Scotland's constitutional question that was always fiercely debated.
So when did you finally decide to actually leave music and go into politics? And was there ever a possibility in your mind that you might be able to juggle both?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I almost sort of stumbled into politics by default. I always had interest in it, and I always felt it was something that I could do reasonably well. I was recruited by Alex Salmond, who came. He was a huge Runrig fan. He used to come to all our shows, and he encouraged me to go into politics, to take up a career, and made sure that I was familiar and acquainted with how our party worked. But I always still see myself as a musician, even though I've been in politics for 20 years and now the longest serving Scottish MP. I always just sort of think that I'm just sort of hanging around in politics. At some point, I'll return to where I actually belong, which is music. And I never expected to stay in as long as this. I always thought I'd maybe do a term, 2 terms, and drift back into music and do something possibly around production or session work. But it never ever happened. And then I suppose the longer you are in politics, like the more enmeshed you become in all this. You think about, if I stand down, will we win this seat? I represent a marginal constituency, so you're always conscious of that. Yeah. And you just keep on going and going. And of course, as a Scottish National Party member, I thoroughly believe in independence for my nation, and the closer we get to that, the more I want to be part of helping deliver it.
And you haven't totally left music. You've got the All MP band MP4. Tell us about that.
See, I knew you'd bring this up.
Pete, not only am I going to bring it up, I'm going to play a little clip as well. Here you are. And who's the Sally in question there?
Well, Sally Bercow actually used to come along and watch the band play quite a lot. She was a big fan of MP4, and to the eternal derision and amusement of her colleagues. That's MP4, their Parliamentary rock band that I put together with Ian Causey, Kevin Brennan and Greg Knight. I think we could sort of safely say that I don't think Top of the Pops should be too concerned about seeing if we're available for an appearance soon. But, it's great fun. We raised lots of issues about the music industry. We've raised about £1 million for charity in all the events that we've done. And, we're the only parliamentary rock band in the world. We keep on hoping the Americans might actually get around to putting together a band that we can have a transatlantic battle of the bands, but we're the only ones so far, and so that's our little bit of fame and note in history.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you for indulging in your life outside of politics with us. I really appreciate it. That's Pete Wishart, the SNP MP, and as he mentioned there, the longest serving Scottish MP as well. Stay tuned.